Okay, welcome to this webinar. I think we got everyone in. So far, maybe a few more people will join, but they will join. Welcome. My name is Mathilde, and I'm from Global Action. We're a solidarity movement in Denmark, based in Copenhagen primarily. And this webinar is organized by us and the Campaign for Free Western Sahara, also based in Denmark. And today we have two excellent guests, Tone Surfen-Mo from Norway, who's a legal scholar and an activist, a volunteer, affiliated with the Support Committee for Western Sahara. And we have Nassa El Khalidi directly from the occupied territory of Western Sahara. It's such a pleasure that you want to be here and spend the afternoon or the evening with us. So the program today is as follows. We will start by a short introduction just to the webinar by me, and then Tone and Nassa will have 10-15 minutes each to sort of present their cases. And after that, we'll open up for discussion with you guys in the audience. But yeah, and also like from the beginning, I just want to say that we're recording this webinar. So if you don't feel comfortable with being recorded, please just turn off your video. Otherwise, it's nice to see your faces as well. So it's up to you. But yeah, the purpose of this webinar is to shed light on the situation in the occupied Western Sahara at the moment, especially seen in the light of the recent developments in the region and in the occupied territories, with Morocco breaking the ceasefire and Polisario declaring war resumed again, and the recent recognition by the US of the Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara in exchange for a normalization of ties between Morocco and Israel. Yeah. What else do I want to say? Yeah, so as many of you might know, the topic of the conflict of Western Sahara, between Western Sahara and Morocco, is a very delicate topic for a lot of people, especially in the region, but also for a lot of people in Denmark or where you are coming from, all you guys in the audience. So I just want to state that this webinar tonight is not a room for discussing the legitimacy of the cause in the struggle of the Western Sahara population, of the Sahrawis and the Polisario front. We can do that elsewhere. The purpose of today is to get to have a better understanding of the situation in the area and what the situation for journalists, especially, and activists in the occupied territory is, and to learn from our speakers and discuss more in depth. Yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. Yeah, so as I said, we will record this, and after a few days from now, we will put it on YouTube, so you can go find it there. Also, Mille is going to be our technical assistant this evening. So after the two presentations, we'll open up the floor for questions and discussions with you guys. You can ask questions by posing your question in the chat, or by simply writing, I have a question, and then Mille will unmute you, because you're all muted right now. And then you can post the question if you want to do that. So you can do it written, or you can do it if you want to say it out loud. Yep. I think that's it for us, or for me at least, from now, or for now. And I'll give the word to Tone, who will sort of start with setting the frame. The floor is yours. Maybe you can introduce yourself just briefly. You can do that better than I can do.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm very happy that you're organizing this webinar on this exact topic, because the situation we have now is worse than it's ever been in the time that I've worked with the occupied territories. So my name is Tone. I'm a legal scholar from Norway, and I work on a voluntary basis with the Norwegian Support Committee for Western Sahara. And in my work, I work mainly with the occupied territories, and I work on individual cases where I try to document them and I try to report them to international institutions in order to seek justice for the victims. But when it comes to the occupied territories, this is, however, not always that easy. The world that we operate in is very, very different from the world that we live in as Norwegians or Danish people, because the occupied territories of Western Sahara is framed by the fact that the people of Western Sahara have been denied the right to self-determination for over 40 years. And because of this denial, we see that arrest, arbitrary detention, torture, violence, denial of freedom of speech is denied. It follows from this very denial. So this is the circumstances that we work under and what we are trying to report, and also what we're trying to monitor and to denounce. And in the occupied territories of Western Sahara, we don't have any efficient international, regional, or local mechanisms that we can turn to for either reporting, monitoring, or effective remedy. And what we see is that a culture of impunity, meaning that no one is held accountable for these violations that we see, is the norm. And when I work on the occupied territories, this is exactly what I find to be the most alarming and the most heartbreaking, this endless culture of impunity that we see. Because in every case that I have worked on, we see a systematic form of Morocco denying all formal allegations. No investigation is ever carried out, and the perpetrator is given impunity. And what we also see is when it comes to the local mechanism is that when local complaints are submitted, the victims report that the authorities either refuse to accept the complaint or that it's either not followed up and is not investigated, so the victim doesn't receive a response. And the same goes for the regional mechanisms. And this we also see even in cases of I work on a lot of cases of political prisoners, and here we have cases of torture, and we see that the activists, Sahrawi activists, they are arrested, they're taken to the police station, they're tortured, and then directly to the court, which is also not denounced, is not investigated, and no one is held accountable, which gives us a culture of impunity when it comes to the local mechanisms. The local and the regional mechanisms is therefore not existing when it comes to the occupied territories, framing our ability to monitor and to report. And for the international mechanisms, which I mainly work on, it is sufficient to note that Morocco systematically fails or even refuses to implement the decisions that are coming from the international bodies, such as the UN human rights mechanisms. So this leaves us with a paradox, because you have local mechanisms that do not monitor, they do not report, you have a culture of impunity, and at the same time you have international mechanisms that have no ability to help the victims because the decisions are not being implemented. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this culture of impunity because I think it's a basis for our main issues when it comes to monitoring and reporting. And my first encounter with this paradox, where you have the lack of local and international, was during the Demonstrators trial in 2017. And there was a decision from the UN Torture Committee on the case of Nama Asfari that was presented to the judge. And the judge himself, he refused to accept this decision. He said it had no legal value in his court because it was not a local decision, it was an international decision. And the judge, he resumed by questioning the victim, so Asfari, about this decision and his credibility. So instead of taking this decision coming from an international institution, he instead questioned the victim and his credibility. And this was for me completely absurd when I sat there as a trial observer, because it means that even when you are monitoring, even when you are reporting and you get an international decision, Morocco refused to implement these decisions in the local jurisdiction. And as far as now, he has served 10 years in a Moroccan jail for his activism, despite this decision. Under international mechanism, and when the state is found to be in breach of their international obligations, they are placed under a duty to remedy this situation. And when it comes to political prisoners, this means that they have to release them. When it comes to activists, it means that they have to carry out investigations to find the perpetrator, and they have to find the perpetrator accountable. But Morocco, however, they refuse to do this, and they refuse to implement the decisions. Which relates to the case of Asfari, as I mentioned, but it also relates to the case of the so-called student group of imprisoned students, where we have decisions from the UN human rights mechanisms, and the case of Mohammed El-Bambaris, who is a Sahrawi journalist connected to Equip Media, the same organization as NASA, who was arrested because of his reporting from the territory. And what we're actually seeing in the cases that I work on and Sahrawi political prisoners is that not only is the decisions not implemented into the local jurisdiction, we also see that the victims that submitted this complaint, in lack of local and regional, they turn to the international, are being punished because they submitted this complaint. So they're subjected to acts of reprisals. And clear evidence of this is traceable in the case of Nama Asfari, as I already mentioned, but also in the case of Aminatou Haidar, and also the case of Nasa that we're honored to have with us today, that also submitted complaints to the international mechanisms and therefore was punished for this. We also see it in the case of the student group. And I find that faced with this situation where we have a culture of impunity, we have no local mechanisms, we have no regional mechanisms, and we have international mechanisms that of course are there, but Morocco doesn't implement the decision. What do we do? In my opinion, it's crucial that we document, that we monitor, and that we continue to report the reality on the ground, because this is the only way we are able to break this culture of impunity and this endless violence that we are currently witnessing. However, what we are seeing is that Morocco has for decades tried to ensure that there are no international witnesses to its human rights violations in Western Sahara. This means that they are continuously expelling all international observers, myself included, in addition to international press trying to enter Western Sahara. In addition to this, you see that the UN peacekeeping force, MINURSO, and you're probably aware of this, the ones listening, doesn't have a human rights monitoring mandate within its competence, so it's not allowed to report on human rights violations that it witnesses. In addition, the UN special procedures are not being invited, are not granted access to the territory, which leaves an even more alarming breach of reporting and a human rights gap. We also see that Amnesty reported on this very recently, that we have a human rights gap that is now growing ever more alarming due to the assumption of war. And we see also that Amnesty and Human Rights Watch have also been denied access. And this was reported also by Reporters Without Borders, that I'm sure that NASA will speak a little bit also about. But Reporters Without Borders, they said that the occupied territories of Western Sahara is a news black hole. And the reason why Reporters Without Borders could report this, and the reason why Amnesty International could report this November, is due to the work of the local activists that we have in the occupied territories of Western Sahara, because none of the international observers and the international human rights organizations are granted access. This also means that the documentation that we have, it builds on the work carried out by the Sahrawi journalists, and they risk their own safety in order to document what is happening to them. So the victims of the violations is also the ones that are reporting it. And it also means that people like us and me, we would not be able to submit individual complaints or to report if we don't have these Sahrawi journalists and human rights defenders carrying out this crucial work. And this also means, or it leads to the massive repression against the Sahrawi journalists and human rights defenders that we are currently witnessing, because they are the only source of information that we can go to in order to document what is happening. And what we see is that ever since 13th of November, the Moroccan occupying forces, when the war broke out, the Moroccan occupying forces have carried out a massive campaign of repressions against Sahrawi human rights activists, but also against Sahrawi civilians. And what we see is that not only is the activists that are reporting and are carrying out campaigns in order to highlight the situation, it's not the only ones being attacked. We also see that arbitrary violence is being carried out against civilians on the streets, is being carried out to people just walking down the street, and also children. And this is very, very alarming situation that is now growing, and it's growing even more worse. And it's growing even more worse because of the targeting of the Sahrawi journalists and human rights defenders that we see, because we don't get to the information when the Sahrawi journalists are being attacked. So the increasing challenge that we have now of documenting what is happening is seen in direct correlation with the current targeting of Sahrawi journalists. And when it comes to the situation of Sahrawi journalists, we are aware that most of them have been forced to go into hiding now. We have received reports that 3 of the Sahrawi journalists belonging to Nushrata Foundation were attempted to be abducted during the last 3 weeks by Moroccan police. And we also saw that the wedding of Nasa and her husband was obstructed by the Moroccan occupying forces as retaliations. And with the latest proclamation made by the US president, we also see that the situation is growing worse, and we fear that it will grow even more worse. So to sum up, the work that we're doing is dependent on the work of the Sahrawi journalists, on the Sahrawi human rights defenders that risk their safety and their lives in order to document, to report. And with that said, I give the word back to you, and hopefully to Nasa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tone. Thank you for the very thorough introduction to the whole situation and the situation for Sahrawi journalists and activists. I was just wondering, before we give the word to Nasa, maybe you can just, in the light of you're mentioning that the harassments and the military presence in the occupied territories have intensified since the ceasefire was broken. And the journalists are facing even harder reprisals and so. But do you also see the importance of their work actually being even more important right now after the recent developments?
Yes, of course. The work on Sahrawi journalists and human rights defenders have always been crucial. They are the only source. They are the basis for several reports being submitted. So they are our eyes, and they are crucial, and it's even more important now because we see that the repression is growing more alarming. And if Morocco succeeds in silencing Sahrawi journalists, it will leave us with a black hole, and all of us will go blind. And it will give Morocco total impunity to act against the Sahrawi civilian population in the occupied territories.
Yeah, thanks. And Nasa, are you ready to take it away? Mile, maybe you want to unmute her.
Unmute now.
Perfect.
So, hello everyone. Thank you so much, Matilda. Thanks to Global Action, and thank you to the Solidarity Movement in the whole Scandinavian country for their efforts to raise our voices to be heard outside of the occupied territory of Western Sahara. So added to what Tuna just highlighted regarding the situation in here, so Western Sahara, first, shall I introduce myself or should I just start?
Please do so.
Yes, so my name is Nazha Al-Khalidi. I'm a Sahrawi journalist, part of a group of media activists which called Equipe Media. It was established in 2009 by a group of young Sahrawi who decided to create this group to document the violations of against Sahrawi rights in the occupied territory, since Western Sahara is a closed territory and there is a Moroccan military blockade on the territory and media blockade. So no one is allowed to be inside Western Sahara to report or to take testimonies from Sahrawi victims, to share the stories and the tragedy of the people in Western Sahara with the world. So we considered ourselves, and we also like regarding the international organizations report, we become like a reliable source of information for them, and we are the only alternative for the international press and the international media. And also we started like to work in this, and we faced so many difficulties, not only in the ground, like by facing the arrestation and by being tortured in Moroccan custodies, but also we faced difficulties outside, since it was very hard to bring international organizations that had like credibility to deal with us as unknown activists in the beginning. And we confront a huge Moroccan propaganda that Morocco used for many years. So as you might know, Morocco, since occupied Western Sahara, denied the will of Sahrawi people and spread like fake informations outside of Western Sahara, saying that all Sahrawis are Moroccans and that Sahrawi people is supporting the Moroccan occupation, which is completely wrong. So it was very hard for us as a journalist to convince international organizations and international press agencies to take our reports and take the informations we give to them, and include the information that we give to them in their reports and highlight the situation in the occupied territory. So this is one of also the difficulties, and we still face it, unfortunately, but we are also doing our efforts to make it clear for those who refuse to highlight the situation of Sahrawi people. So according, as Tuna mentioned, to many organizations, Western Sahara, for example, as according to the Freedom House, it's American organizations, Western Sahara is classified as one of the most militarized region in the world. So we have a huge number of military and the police inside the territory that, of course, repress the people in here and prevent them from expressing their opinion regarding these conflicts and expressing themselves to saying that we reject the Moroccan control and we want our right of freedom and independence. As you know, also there is only, I mean, one observer that we call it as a blinded observer from United Nations. There was a mission in here, came in 1991 after the ceasefire between Morocco and Front Polisario to organize a referendum, but since 1991, there was no referendum taking place in here, and the MINURSO still refusing monitoring human rights. So the situation of the human rights, Morocco started a wave of arrests, especially after the war start again in the 13th November, after Morocco violated the ceasefire and intervened by force against peaceful demonstrators that were protesting against a breach in the illegal wall that divide our country and our people, and that was used by Moroccan occupation to transport our natural resources to Africa. So there were demonstrators that came from the refugee camp who decided to close this bridge and say that enough is enough, and we, the United Nations, has to intervene against this illegal transportation of our natural resources and this illegal gap that exists in the wall, while we are not allowed to go to our country, and while Morocco is keep occupying our land. So United Nations has to solve the problem by by giving to the Sahrawis the opportunity to vote for their own future by themselves. So Morocco intervened against those demonstrations by force, and of course Polisario had to defend this protester, and Polisario officially announced that they are going to start a war against Morocco. And of course Morocco using this time to raise and increase the repression against Sahrawi people inside the territory by starting a wave of arrests against the Sahrawi people. And of course, dozens of Sahrawis have been arrested. So now in the public street, there is a terror. Moroccan occupying forces is arresting everybody, stopping cars and arrest people. The Sahrawi activists, their houses are surrounded by dozens of police officers, Moroccan police officers. As Tuna mentioned, like regarding just what I faced a few days ago when I wanted to celebrate my wedding. I was about like getting arrested. Moroccan occupying forces came to my family house and cut off the lights and surrounded my house and threatened me by taking me to the prison because I wanted to get married with a well-known activist in here. So of course Morocco is trying to silence everyone in here by this kind of threats, and also by arresting people, trying to hide the real reality, which is that everybody here is wanting their freedom, and everybody here is now supporting Polisario front and supporting Polisario decision in go back to the war. Unfortunately, of course, we don't support like more violence in here, but still Sahrawi people believed that they have been betrayed by the international community for 30 years, and we were waiting for a peaceful solution, but nobody heard us. So now Sahrawi are celebrating the war, and regarding to the international newspaper, we are the only people who celebrate the war, unfortunately. But still, it's the only choice. Of course, there are many organizations that say that Morocco is, using violence against Sahrawi human beings in the occupied territory. The last organization, Amnesty International, that wrote a report just last month, and also International Federation for Human Rights, and also City, the organization Mondial against the torture. They also announced reports last month saying that the human rights situation has to be monitored in the occupied territory of Western Sahara. And we have this development with Donald Trump tweet that gives also, that changed everything and give the green light to Morocco to make more violence in the occupied territory. Now Morocco are calling the Moroccan settlers in the occupied territory to celebrate every day by organizing march in the streets, celebrating this illegal proclamation from Donald Trump that recognized Moroccan sovereignty on Western Sahara. And we see this proclamation as a support to what Morocco is doing against Sahrawi people. Now we are waiting for more violence, and Morocco say it clearly by the governors in here, in these demonstrations that's organized by the Moroccan settlers, say that we are going to give harsh sentences to separates, what they call it separatists, since they described Sahrawi people as a separatists. and they promised us that they're going to put us in prisons if we say any words. And now the greatest country in the world recognized Sahara as a part of Morocco, so nobody now is allowed anymore to say any words. So the repression that's already exists is going to be increased more and more while the territory is closed, and the only way that we use to express ourselves is like our phones and the email that we have, it's just online. And you know that Morocco is controlling everything, and they can just like cut the Wi-Fi, and we will be just disappeared, and nobody will hear from us anymore. So we really call the world to stand for Sahrawi people at this moment. We have the war that is going on. We have United States recognition, illegal recognition now during these days, even though like regarding the international law, this is a legal proclamation, and there is the announcement from United States itself, from the Congress, against this illegal proclamation. There is organizations in United States that stand against Donald Trump regarding this, but still Morocco is benefiting from time, and they can use these days before the Donald Trumps be out of the government in the United States to punish Sahrawis and to arrest people. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Nasa. That's very, very touching, and thank you for being with us tonight, despite all the circumstances that you're placed. Yeah. Before we open up the floor for questions, if you do have questions, please write in the chat your question, or that you have a question, then we can unmute you and you can ask. But before that, or while people are thinking about what questions they want to pose, I just want to ask you, Nasa, can you maybe, because I know Equipe Media, the activist group that you're part of, is using quite alternative methods in order to document protests and document violations of human rights and all this, like using rooftops, for example, because you cannot really be in the streets with cameras and so. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on, are you even, because to me this sounds super, super harsh. It sounds like a place you almost cannot make any movement. Are you even able to sort of report or document the things that are going on at the moment, or what are the risks? Are you, can you actually run those risks?
Sure. So yes, when I'm saying that I'm a part of an organization called Equipe Media, maybe like the people who are hearing me now think that it's an organization with an office with like professional materials, but this is not like that. In here we work from our houses, and we organize our meeting clandestinely, since Morocco is like preventing the activists from being together, and also our houses are under continuous surveillance by the Moroccan service intelligence. So it's very hard to make our meetings happen, but we try to like organize secret meeting to discuss about like our work. Of course, regarding like the documentation, there is another problem that we are not, we don't get access to any kind of information. So for us as a journalist, it's very hard to go to a Moroccan administration and ask, for example, to the Moroccan trial and ask for more information about like prisoners. It's completely forbidden. It's very hard for us to go, for example, to the Moroccan companies and ask for information about like the natural resources. No, we are not allowed to be in that area, and all the workers in these companies are foreigners who are exploiting our natural resources illegally, or Moroccans. And if you find Sahrawi, you can find just few Sahrawis, and they don't like give them position that allow them to get sensitive informations. So the only information we try to get access to it, which is filming the demonstration, and not from the streets, not in the ground, but by using, as you said, like high buildings, and try to hide the cameras and film without let the police see our cameras. So this is the only information at the moment. But we try also to connect people for like secretly and get more information to make some investigations that we provide to the international organizations to highlight more about like the Moroccan violations in the ground. And of course, if the Moroccans show anybody like filming, of course he will be in the prison and he will face like trials. And this has happened to many of us. I'm talking about Equipe Media, and I'm talking about like victims. All the members in Equipe Media and in other human rights organizations in the occupied territory, all the journalists, all the activists are victims of Moroccan violence and have experienced it, tortured in Moroccan custody. And I'm telling you, all of them. If you don't find like human rights defenders who have imprisonment for like 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 16 years, you will find them like sentence, like have been imprisonment for 2 years, and for sure have experienced tortured for many, many days. And as Tuna just mentioned, now they are our colleagues in the prison, sentenced to 30 years, just because they do the same we do, just because they film demonstration, just because they express their opinion and they say it loudly that we don't want Morocco to be exist in our land, and we want our people in refugee camp to be in here, to benefit from their natural resources, and to have a better life in their homeland. This is all what we fight for. And we have the right, of course, to regarding the international law, according to the international law, we have the right to choose like our future, and we have the right of freedom and independence.
Thank you, Nessa. Thank you. Tony, do you want to comment on what Nessa just said? Or do you want another question?
I can comment on what she said. I think it was a brilliant summary of how the situation actually is. But I'd like to add just one bit, and that is the legal situation that Sahrawi activists and journalists work under, which makes them or forces them to work in these underground movements. As Nasa said, they can't meet, they can't operate as we do in Norway or Denmark, like having meetings with each other. That's simply impossible in the occupied territories. And that's linked to the continued illegal annexation of the occupied territories, which means that Morocco has implemented its own legislation in Western Sahara and under the Moroccan Penal Code to advocate in favor of the right to self-determination, or to mention Western Sahara, is criminalized under the Moroccan Penal Code. And for the situation of Sahrawi journalists, the very profession of being a Sahrawi journalist is also criminalized, which actually the case of Nasa is a symbol of, because, and she can explain herself if she wants to also, but she was facing charges of calling herself a journalist without having an accreditation from the Moroccan government. And the very reason she doesn't have that is because the Moroccan government has criminalized the work that she does, because in that way they can constantly threaten her with imprisonment because she uses her freedom of expression protected under international law, but that Morocco has criminalized under local law, which is a direct consequence of the illegal annexation.
Yeah, thank you. There's a few questions in the chat right now. And if other people have any questions, please just write them down. But there's one asking, how are the settlers acting towards the Sahrawis? Is there a difference now, apart from the marches? Maybe Nasser, you're the best want to answer that? Is there any like difference in the way that the Moroccan settlers are acting towards the Sahrawis?
Actually, we had a really bad experience with Moroccan settlers and how they act towards Sahrawis since they attacked in many times, especially after events that's happening here. And as an example, in 2010, it was before Arab Spring. Actually, it was a big protest in Western Sahara called the Gdemizi camp, where when Sahrawis decided to went out of the cities and built tents to protest and to ask for their political, economical, and social rights. After this event, so this event took 28 days before Moroccan occupying forces attacked the camp and just destroyed it and arrest people. There were a huge number of Moroccan settlers inside Laayoune and all the cities in Western Sahara harassed Sahrawis and attacked their houses. And of course, it was a fight with between the settlers and the Sahrawis, and they were protected by the police. So in these also marches and demonstrations that was organized just one day ago, it was also harassment from the Moroccan settlers in the public streets and what we call Sahrawis all the time, especially during these kind of demonstrations, to be at home and to make all the streets empty from Sahrawis and just to let them go by themselves. Unfortunately, even though we have been together for 40 years, we lived together, but there is no close relations between Sahrawis and Moroccan settlers, because Sahrawis see them as they cannot trust them, especially that Western Sahara demonstrations happen all the time, and they can stand for only their government and the Moroccan regime. So, there is also a brainwash inside Morocco, and many people believe in Moroccan unity and believe in Islamic, what they call it, Islamic unity. So for them to say a word about the king or about that Sahara is not a part of Morocco, this is something for them, something forbidden to say, and they can die, as they say, for their unity. And this is one of the reasons why the Sahrawis are not coexistent with the Moroccans.
Yeah. So what you're saying here is basically that within the national sort of story, or the national imagination of a unified Morocco, is also Western Sahara as part of Morocco that cannot be separated within the national story about themselves, right? And I think that's a very good point, because that's just what we see in Denmark, what we see all around Europe as well. Whenever, during the past weeks, there've been protests for a free Western Sahara, organized by many different organizations and networks and the diaspora. And for showing up to a lot of those, organizing counter demonstrations, are Moroccan demonstrators within those countries in Europe, at least. And that's just for me, we've experienced it here in Denmark, at least. And I feel you really sense that that's a very strong narrative, at least a strong national narrative, where Western Sahara and Morocco cannot be separated, and Western Sahara is just the southern provinces in Morocco.
Yeah, but we cannot also deny that they are parties, and they are Moroccans who believe in global principles and human rights, and that they support Sahrawis. But unfortunately, they are also facing repression from their regime. So it's also very hard for them to stand, clearly give clearly declarations about the support for an independent Western Sahara.
Yeah. Okay, so Ina has a question in the chat, and maybe it's a good way to sort of set the frame. She's asking, where is the actual fighting happening at the moment, and how many Sahrawi people live in the occupied territories, just to get that straight. Tone and Asa want to take that.
What was the first question?
Where is the actual fighting happening at the moment? The war, where is it exactly?
So there is statements that given by the Polisario Front every day, and each statement they mention their areas about like the war that where the war is taking place. So they the most of the areas until now they are like surrounded by the wall, the areas that's close to the wall. So they don't attack the occupied territory yet, but there is official statements from the president and from some also other officials in the Sahrawi military that say that they are going to reach the occupied territory, but at the moment they don't reach the occupied territory yet. About the number of Sahrawis in here, we don't have an exact statistic, so it's very hard for us also to account how many Sahrawis in the occupied territory. But like from Moroccan statistic, in Laayoune, for example, there are like 300,000, like the whole population, and Sahrawis representing 25%. So like the population, including the Moroccan police and the Moroccan settlers and the military. So we don't represent too much in our country. Sahrawi are minority in the occupied territory.
Yeah, thank you. There's also a question from Ole, which is, how is the status of the liberation struggle? And what are the perspectives of a liberated land? That's a big one. I don't know if you have any clear answers to that. Maybe Tone, maybe you want to try it out.
I think it's a very big question, very difficult to answer. But what I can say is that Western Sahara and the government that you find in exile, or the camps where they have everything in place, they run like a small government in exile, shows that they are able to be a state. I don't know how else to answer this question, but I found it very, very interesting that Christopher Ross said the same thing in a Facebook status, I think it was yesterday, where he said that Western Sahara have the perspectives of being an independent country and they need to be given the referendum. So I don't know how else to answer that. Maybe NASA has some ideas.
Yeah, actually there is an excuse that's given by the Moroccans and also their allies, saying that we are weak and we cannot like establish a state, and this will threat the security, which is completely wrong. I find Western Sahara like it's a big country. It's the same. It has the same distance as UK, and what established the states is the natural resources. And Western Sahara is one of the richest country in the world. We have fish, phosphate, oil, gold. So I think it will not be difficult to establish a state for us. And also, if you see, there is like a credibility that Polisario got for like the 30 years where they were protected the borders, and many organizations witnessed and declared that Polisario helped a lot in the security issues regarding like their existence in the exile and how they protect their boundaries.
Yeah, I think also if I may, Ole, I think something that he's hinting at with his question is also what Thea asks in her question. She asks, Nasser, you mentioned that you're actually somewhat happy about the end of the ceasefire. And then she asks, how the Sahrawi people relationship to the Polisario at this time? And maybe that's also like a question of what's the status of the liberation struggle? What's the sort of relationship between the people and the front line? Yeah, is there any support for an actual armed struggle at the moment? And are people like supporting the Polisario front at the moment? Or are Polisario supporting the people? That might also be a question that you could ask.
Yes, actually, when I say that Sahrawis starting to celebrate in the war, not only like they celebrated the war, but also there are so many Sahrawis in diaspora started to get into the military and starting to be militarized and held arms, and they say it loudly. They publish their videos. They say we are ready to fight Moroccan occupation. This is something that we don't want, but I mean, this is a fact that's already happened. All Sahrawis now are supporting the war, and of course, like according to from your question, Polisario started to lose their credibility, especially after like the Sahrawi losing hope in refugee camp. You know, no future there. The young people are really tired from the repression here, and pushing Polisario to do something, to react and believe that like or as they say, the weapons is going to get I mean their rights and the independence. And actually this is increased after the Sahrawi refugees decided to demonstrate in Al Gargarat. Polisario already threats Morocco and saying if Morocco make any mistake and attack the Sahrawis, we will restart the war again. And of course, the Sahrawi citizens in the occupied territory and in refugee camps saying that if Polisario will not like take a step and will not defend our brothers and sisters in Gargarat, it's gonna be their ends. Nobody will trust Polisario anymore. And so Polisario has to take the step on defending people there and of course restart the war. So now people start to trust Polisario again, and of course the hope come back again, and the people now see the war as a solution for an end for their suffering and their occupation.
Yeah, so what you're saying is basically that if Polisario was still counting on being Polisario, Liberation Front, they needed to respond to the calls of the people who are actually more progressive in terms of like actually wanting to resume war or actually wanting to step out of the political negotiation dead end than the Polisario itself, as I understand it. Tony, do you have anything to add to this? Like, what is the status of the liberation struggle and the Sahrawis' relationship with the Polisario front?
I think again, this is a very difficult question to answer, but I think what we are seeing is that the people of Western Sahara have been placed under occupation for over 40 years, and you had 29 years of deadlock. That's actually the same age as me. It's a very long time. 29 years of waiting, and 29 years of generation after generation after generation. You have now third generation living in the Sahrawi refugee camps, with the young people not seeing any future, not having any hope, and with the people in the occupied territories also generation after generation after generation seeing that they are being brutally repressed due to the fact that they are Sahrawis, due to the fact that they are Sahrawis from Western Sahara and not in line with the policy of Morocco. So I think this paradox that has been built up for 29 years with the peace process having been stalled at an international level, and the UN have failed to fulfill their promise to the Sahrawi people, at one point the hope was bound to go out. So I find myself, and I was shocked when the war broke out. I thought it was very, very, very sad. And for me, it's very, very difficult to support a war. But I understand the reason why I really do. Even though I hope that they lay their arms down, I hope that the UN go back to the UN-led peace process and that we have a solution without an armed struggle. I completely understand the reason why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. There's another question from Aunita, who's asking, that's for you, Nasa, I think. What are your channels out of the occupied territory? Who receive equipped media's information in different countries? And then I might want to add, what are the biggest challenges for you as an activist-based network reporting on violations in Western Sahara? What are the biggest challenges in terms of actually getting out your information and collaborate with the people that are receiving your information?
Mm-hmm. So, we started our struggle by filming and using social media to publish the video we take. And we started to collect testimonies of victims. And when we managed to make contact with some organizations outside, that they offer to us like some training, and they invite us to Europe. And I'm talking here about like from my personal experience, I got the opportunity from the support committee, thanks to them, who managed to find an opportunity for me to study photography in Norway, thanks to all of them. And I managed to study photography there, where also I built some networks in there. And this has happened also to my colleagues who make like some relations with the human rights organizations outside, and we developed our skills and we started to write reports and we started to build more connections. And this is how we get to these international organizations. So from one person to another, they put us in touch with international organizations, and they give also, like they become as a reference until we become references for ourselves, and our reports become adapted by, taken by these organizations. So as I said, for example, when we try to contact like some international organizations, they put us in touch with their offices in, for example, North Africa, for example, in Libya or in Tunisia. And the workers are Arabic, and Arabic are not very involved in the Western Sahara issue, and they're not very supportive to our case. So it was very hard to convince them to take the informations we give to them. And I will give an example, like for example with Reporters Without Borders, as Tuna mentioned, they already announced the first reports ever that talk about Western Sahara when they describe it as a black hole. It wasn't easy to convince them to write about Western Sahara. We have been in touch with their office in North Africa, but they refused to write. And then we went to Spain, their office in Spain. And of course, we met some very good workers, and they agreed to write this report and announce it, which was very good. So it's very hard to find also the workers in the international organization that take the information and publish about it. But now, everybody care more about Western Sahara, and they are trying to reach out to the activists in here, which is very good, even though the situation for us is worse, because the media didn't become interested until the war start again. We have been calling them. We have been trying to reach the international media, give them informations, talk about our situation, but nobody cares until the war will start again. So now the reality is completely different from before. Now everybody care more about Western Sahara developments.
Yeah. And Tone, do you have any experience with working with other international bodies, other international organizations, and their take on the conflict or on the information that sort of comes from the occupation?
We have, of course, connections with other international human rights organizations working on Western Sahara, and all organizations face the same challenges, which is the lack of monitoring. Because the occupied territory is, as I said in the beginning, it's a black hole. We're not allowed to enter, we're not allowed to monitor, we're not allowed to document ourselves what's happening. And at the same time, you therefore rely on local journalists and activists, and they are facing tremendous challenges in their work. They're constantly being threatened, intimidated, and harassed, which leads to the monitoring and the documentation to be very, very difficult. So the international human rights organizations, they face the same kind of challenges. And but the international human rights organizations such as Amnesty and Reporters Without Borders, they build upon reliable sources from the occupied territories, such as we do.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question from Mohammed, who's writing, hey, I think you're doing a real nice job. That's for you too, I guess. And then he asks, are the Sahrawi planning to do a Gidemystique Volume 2 to go out and protest? Does any of you know of any plans for doing a Gidemystique Volume 2? Now it's 10 years ago. Time to do it again.
Right now, I don't think so. But yeah, you know, we are talking about like people who are living under oppression. So anytime they can react, we can't say that it's impossible to happen, but it's difficult at the moment, especially after the war started. Morocco is bringing like a lot of so many military from Morocco to Western Sahara. The police are everywhere. Like the Sahrawis, for example, for us activists, it's very hard for us like to move freely in the streets. So the people now are starting to care more about their safety. Now it's the war, so it's everything. It's completely changed. Now the Sahrawi people are asking for like protection for ICRC, United Nations, to bring like the Red Cross to protect civilians, because we find ourselves alone in here, and we really need the international protections in the occupied territory, and the humanitarian law needed to be implemented in Western Sahara. But yeah, the people can anytime struggle and can anytime protest, even though there is the war.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is from Michael, and he's asking, what is the position now from the AU and from other governments in Africa supporting the Polisario? Maybe that's for Tone. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't think I have a complete overview over all African countries, but Western Sahara is a different issue when you go to Africa, or if you're in Norway. In Africa, Western Sahara is recognized as a country. So the fact that the US basically said that Western Sahara is part of Morocco is, of course, a huge violation of the conventions of the African Union, as Western Sahara is a country in Africa and recognized as such.
Yeah. And Nessa, do you have any, like, has there been any particular statements or reactions to the tweet from Trump from other countries in the continent?
Yes, they are. I mean, I don't know about like African Union, if they already announced any statements about this, but we have so many countries in Europe that denounced Trump's tweets, such as Spain, that is already colonized Western Sahara for almost 90 years, and they are the only one regarding the international law as the administration on the territory. So they denounced this tweet, which is something very good. We found it very good. And also France, the Moroccan ally, denounced this tweet, and we have also many other countries around the world that denounce it. So I mean, this tweet moved the Western Sahara issue after I mean long frozen study on this conflict.
Yeah. So actually, the tweet has sort of forced other countries and states to sort of react on it by sort of emphasizing and restating their support for the UN-based solution, I guess. And isn't that also the case in Norway, Tone? Or did
That they made a statement?
Yeah. Or
yes, after the resumption of war, we had a letter sent to the Foreign Department, and we have received a reply today that I'm not sure it's been published, but the official position of the Norwegian government is that they continue to support the UN-led peace process and the right to self-determination for the people of Western Sahara. So that is a very, very good statement. And I also saw in the chat that Catherine Constantinis from South Africa made a statement about South Africa. So if you want to know more, then give Catherine the floor by all means. But Norway has stated that they support the right to self-determination for the people of Western Sahara and the UN-led process.
Yeah, cool. And maybe we should actually give the word to Catherine. Yeah, if you want to. Just to say something about, describe what's the situation or the perspective of the South African government on this issue. Amelia, maybe you want to unmute her. Yeah.
Thank you so much. To both ladies on the panel, I applaud and salute you, and truly you are incredible fighters for the cause, and thank you for tonight's forum. Just to say that South Africa has certainly denounced the statements by Trump. We have slammed the statements very harshly through a public statement, but made by both from a political perspective, from party politics side, as well as from the Department of International Relations. A statement, the link to the statement has been put in the chat by Anne. I see that she's on the ball. But just to say, South Africa stands firmly to say that we believe in the self-determination and a referendum for the Sahrawi people, and we recommit ourselves as a country to stand by that self-determination for the people of Western Sahara. We do not agree with the statements in any shape or form, and are quite horrified that a country such as America, based on its democratic values of freedom, liberation and democracy, would make such horrific statements in such a public way. And I think that it tells of the lack of leadership that we see coming from the US. But we have certainly stood very firm in our support of Western Sahara. And also when on the 13th of November, when the ceasefire agreement was breached, we also then made a very strong commitment again to the cause of Western Sahara. Our president sits as the chairman of the African Union. There has not yet been a statement from the African Union, but I hope that, we have been publicly writing letters, open letters to President Ramaphosa in his position as the chairman of the African Union, and we really hope that they will, sooner rather than later, make a bold statement, and one that actually calls for action and urgent action. We can't just have statements coming out of the African Union or the United Nations for that matter. We need definitive, decisive and bold action from our leadership, and so we try to continue to push for that.
Amazing. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much.
Updating us on this. And I've seen a lot of protests going on in South Africa as well. You guys are all over.
Yes, we
There's another question. I think we covered at least, or please write another question if you didn't get your answers covered about the AU statements. But Mohammed has another question. He is writing, where are the big Sahrawi families? Is there a leader? Do they not want to speak out, or are they under the Moroccan government? Or do some of them don't have interest in a solution? So I guess this question is sort of maybe to you, Nessa. There are some big Sahrawi families in the occupied territories, but who are they and what's the interest in this? Have there been any response or action from their side? And please correct me if I misunderstood your question, Mohammed. You can correct me. Perfect.
Can he ask his question? I didn't get what he wants to say, what he meant with the big families.
Do you want to ask your own question, Mohammed? Mila can unmute you if you want.
Yeah. Hello. Well, thank you very much for participation. No, I just would like to hear about the big families. You know, the leaders, the Sahrawi leaders there in the Ayun and that kind of stuff. Do they really speak out or something like that? We never hear about the, you know, the big tribe or the big families to raise their voice. Or
tribes. What do you mean by tribes? You mean, yeah, we have tribes in our community, but the tribes doesn't have any value when it comes to the Sahrawi struggle against the occupation.
Yeah,
so,
of course, yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I just mean about the, you know, the big families or the other the other Sahrawi we hear about in Ayun and that kind of stuff. You know, I don't know what their name is, but there is. We don't hear about the men, the big Sahrawi men over there who try to speak out about the issues. I don't
we
know
are
if
small.
No,
Don't
no.
see us as big.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Huh?
Of course, you are doing a great job. No, I just,
Thank you.
I just want to. I mean, about by that is.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know about what you are asking about. I mean, I don't understand. What do you mean by big families? We have families in Western Sahara. We have big families that have like 7 siblings, 5 siblings, 10 siblings. What do you mean?
No. I mean, we always see the women's, you know, try to raise their voice and that kind of stuff. By that I mean, where's the men behind the pictures? You know, when you see. That's what I mean about it. You know, if you understand what I mean, actually.
Men are in the Moroccan prisons.
Yeah. Okay.
Men
I
are
get that.
sentenced to life in the prison. 30 years in the prison. Men are now fighting, holding their weapons, and confront the Moroccan military.
Yeah, I see that.
In the Sahara Desert. Men now, they are not allowed to speak and to say any word in the streets. If men go out to the street and speak and say Western Sahara is going to face prison, he's going to be tortured by the Moroccan police.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
This is the situation of Sahrawi men. But you know, Sahrawi women is also taking a big part in the Sahrawi struggle.
Of course.
And they are protesting, and they are confront the Moroccan repression in the public streets. And there are many Sahrawi women who have been killed under torture in Moroccan secret jails. And now the hero is a woman. We are Moroccan occupying forces is facing Sahrawi women, and Sahrawi women now is the strongest, one of the strongest fighter in the world.
I see that. Definitely.
We can't say like we can't see the struggle. We cannot like see the struggle as a doesn't have any value because only women are taking big part in it. I mean, you can't say that, or you can't ask this kind of question with these big families. If you see that Sahrawis or the Sahrawi activists and fighters smaller, this is your point of view. But we
no, it's not like that. No, it's not like that. Of course, I see them as a big thing, and I am agree with them, and I'm actually standing with them. It's not like that. It just about you see many families. You know, I don't know if they are with Morocco. Some Sahrawi people, they call them Sahrawi people. They are with the Moroccan government, and you know
they are pro-Moroccans, of course.
Yeah,
they are pro-Moroccans, but there are very few. There are only 3 or 4 families who benefit from a Moroccan occupation, who have villas.
I know.
Villas in Rabat, villas in Lyon. But
yes,
we don't recognize them as a Sahrawis, and we don't mention them because they care only about money, and they don't care about the prisoners, the Sahrawi prisoners. They don't care about thousands of refugees in the refugee camps who live in the desert, where the
Of course.
temperature is up to 60
Yeah, of course.
degrees.
I
They
agree
don't,
with you.
they don't care about principles, about humanity. They don't understand these words. So we don't recognize them and we don't talk about them. And there are very few, believe me. If Morocco, we are minority in the occupied territory. We are minority as a Sahrawis. And Morocco have never do anything to Sahrawis, anything good to Sahrawis. Since we knew Morocco, we knew Morocco, it means prisons, tortured, you are going to be, I mean, disappeared. This is what we see and what we face from Morocco.
Yeah, of course, I agree with you.
This is our reality. About like the rich people in here, the rich people, all the rich people are used by the Moroccan occupation in in dirty politic. You cannot find, as you describe them, big families or rich families.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
They become rich by their work or by themselves. No. If you want to be rich in here, if you want to be big, as you describe it, you have to work for Moroccan occupation to get some money and sell your dignity. And that's it. This is the big families that you meant. This is the big families.
Thank you, Nasa. I think Mohammed got his answer, and we others did as well. But yeah, it's sort of, I think also what was the point of Mohammed's question was also what you're hinting at in the end here. Like, so who are the Sahrawis which are actually having a higher position than, you know, the majority of the Sahrawis, and how are they sort of taking part in the struggle, or are they, or whose side are they on? I just want to alert to, I put a link in the chat if any of you are interested. It's sort of for a report that came out 10 days ago or 11 days ago, made by the Norwegian Support Committee for Western Sahara, Equipe Media, Noshata, and other activist collective in the occupied territories, and a Spanish organization called Nomads. And it's sort of, yeah, maybe Tone, maybe you want to present it a bit and just describe it with a few words.
So we, after the war broke out, we have been trying to document what is happening in the territory. We published first one urgent appeal in light of the repression. We had reports coming in that there were mass arrests of young people after having attended demonstrations in support for the right to self-determination and supporting the decision of Polisario. So in support of the repression that we witnessed, we published a report, and we publish now a second report. And our second report relates to the situation of Sahrawi journalists, and it goes back to my point of Sahrawi journalists is the most crucial source of information that we have, and they are currently being targeted, which means that the news black hole that we already have is being further tightened. And I like also to point out that in this report we detail how the situation of Sahrawi journalists is. And as I said earlier, the profession of being a Sahrawi journalist is criminalized under Moroccan legislation, under the Moroccan Penal Code, but also the press code. It outlaws the profession of being a Sahrawi journalist because they document violations in the occupied territories, and because they acknowledge that Western Sahara is a non-self-governing territory and that they have the right to self-determination, which means that this kind of activism, this kind of reporting, this kind of work is criminalized. So the report, it details how you have the legislation, but also the difficulties that Sahrawi journalists face, which we have tried to touch upon a little bit, about the difficulties that Sahrawi journalists have when they work in the occupied territories, meaning that they have to work in underground movements. And Equipe Media and Noshata, we were very honored to have on board on this report. They are two of the Sahrawi media outlets that you find in the occupied territories, and they have amazing journalists working with them. We're serving as credible sources for us working internationally. And they helped us on this report, and it details how Sahrawi journalists have to work underground and secretly, because when they are doing this kind of work, they are also placing themselves at tremendous risk. which is also the reason why not everybody will take a stand on the Western Sahara position in the occupied territories, because the magnitude of the repression, because not only is the just to say that you support the right to self-determination criminalized, you can actually face imprisonment of up to 2 years. But it also means that you will face other sort of punishment, like losing your job, losing your income, losing your housing. Your whole family will be targeted. You will be subject to slandering campaigns. So there is, you face a lot of risk by choosing to do this kind of human rights work, which it basically is, because you report on human rights violations. So these Sahrawi journalists, these Sahrawi activists we have, these people walking out in the streets, denouncing what is happening, is actually some of the greatest heroes that we have walking around among us. And Nasa I'm so proud to be in this webinar together with her as a Sahrawi female journalist, because she is subjected to even worse forms of harassment because she's a woman. So she's also subjected to violence because she is a woman in a different form than men are. But men are again also subjected to other form of reprisal for their work. And as NASA said, men is held in prison. Currently, we only have men that are Sahrawi political prisoners, and they are being subjected to fierce violence and torture in a different form than women are. So we see a difference there. But my point is that the report that we publish, it tries to capture how these Sahrawi journalists risk their own safety, their whole prospect of a future, basically, because they are deprived of their job, their housing, their education, when they choose to do this kind of work. We try to describe how they are placing themselves at this risk, how important their work are. And also, we also touch upon the latest repression against Sahrawi journalists, which is the case of the 3 Sahrawi journalists with Nusata that was latest attempted to be abducted in the streets of Laayoune by Moroccan police, but they managed to escape and are now in hiding, which means that these 3 journalists that have provided crucial reporting from this blacked out territory is now in hiding. So we have lost 3 journalists that do tremendous work that is so important in order to know what is actually going on in the occupied territories. And we also, of course, had the wedding of Nasa and Ahmed being destroyed, which was a travesty, because it was a beautiful occasion that Nasa and Ahmed was getting married, and Nasa had been subjected to reprisal for years because of her work as a journalist. She has been arrested, she has been subject to violence, she has been subject to slandering campaigns because of the work that she does as a journalist. And in this report, we try to capture it, even though just with the use of words, it's very hard to explain what we're actually witnessing. But in this report, we attempt to do so. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tone. Thank you so much for your great work. And actually, I want to ask you, because I don't see any other questions in the chat. So now I want to ask a question. Because you're talking about, of course, like the whole topic of your report and the topic of this talk is like the repression of Sahrawi journalists and the challenges of reporting from such a closed area. And in the beginning, you mentioned that the UN mission to Western Sahara, the MINURSO mission, does not have a human rights monitoring mandate. As one of, I don't know if this is the only UN mission or one of the only UN missions around the world without such a mandate, which means that they cannot monitor and they cannot report on violations on human rights in the occupied territories or in the refugee camps in Tindouf in Algeria. But I just want to ask, what exactly would such a human rights monitoring mandate of the UN actually, what would that change to the situation right now for journalists in the occupied territory, and for the reliable information that international organizations require? And also, do we see sort of an opening, because like until now the UN has just like every year, every half a year renewed the mandate of the MINURSO without adding a human rights monitoring mandate, and there's been a lot of resistance, especially from France in the Security Council, to actually add such a mandate. But do we see an opening now? Would there be any chance with the latest developments to actually add such a mandate to the MINURSO mission, or is it just like my wishes of change? That's sort of and I see that we have like a member of what is it called in Danish, FN-forbundet, in the audience, the UN friendly organization in Denmark that are actually working on pressuring the Danish politicians and political decision makers to actually push for a human rights monitoring mandate. So maybe that would also be an interesting question for him, or maybe Leva, you want to comment on it later. So did you get my question? It was a long one. Tone?
Thank you. I think first I'd like to answer it with a human rights monitoring mandate within the MINURSO mission is crucial in order to protect the Sahrawi civilian population. So not only journalists, not only human rights offenders that are actively being targeted and persecuted by the Moroccan occupying forces, but also the Sahrawi civilian population in full. And this is, for me, it's absurd that MINURSO is one of the only UN peace forces that do not have these monitoring mechanisms already in their mandate. And the reason for this is, as you said, it's the veto laid down by France. And what we're seeing now is, I suppose that the UN Security Council right now don't have the necessary support to include human rights monitoring into its mandate. And this is mainly because of France pushing to not have it. And I think a very crucial question to ask is why not? And that is simply because Morocco does not want to let the information get out of the territory. They don't want monitoring in place, because if monitoring was in place, the conflict would shift dramatically, because people would know what is actually happening in the occupied territories. So Morocco uses all its efforts to prevent this truth from coming out. And it's also the reason why France is blocking it in the Security Council. And this is also the reason why those trying to report is being targeted. But I hope, and I also have a hope, that we will see a shift. But I think that it depends on having the UN human rights mechanisms on board. I think we need a High Commissioner for Human Rights pressuring the UN Security Council to include such a human rights monitoring mandate. And I think it depends on us also actively engaging with the UN human rights mechanisms and giving them information about what is actually happening in the occupied territories. Because right now we have a human rights gap that is not being filled, because Morocco is actively trying to prevent it from happening. But I think it's able to shift it.
We hope so. Fingers crossed. Let's push for it. Nasa, do you have anything to comment on? Like, would a human rights monitoring mandate change anything for, for you guys on the ground?
Yes, I think like before, you mean when it was like when Sahrawis were waiting for a peaceful solution, because now the situation is changed, the war already restart, and the Sahrawis now asking for the ICRC to intervene to protect the civilians in here. But before, I think Morocco refused to give this mandate, to accept to this mandate to be given to the MINURSO to protect and monitor human rights, because they are afraid from being exposed, since all Sahrawis are against Morocco. And if we have this mandate, like monitoring human rights and protection of human rights in here, then all Sahrawis will resist peacefully, they will express their opinion, and Morocco will be exposed. So the propaganda that Morocco used, that all Sahrawis are supporting autonomy and all Sahrawis are supporting Moroccan control, it will be disappeared, and of course Morocco will be in a bad position. So and all the world will know the will of Sahrawi people, and will believe that Sahrawis are fighting for their freedom. At least, I'm not talking about the government, because if the governments want to change their political position regarding this conflict, they would do. but I'm talking about the people who can put pressure on these governments and to make a big solidarity movement in the globe, can change the political positions of their governments. And of course, these people have to know more about the situation in here to take this case with them and to defend it in their countries. So of course, Morocco were afraid to be exposed, and the monitoring of human rights, if these mandates give it to the MINURSO, would change the situation and would help also Sahrawis mentally, because here we are fighting and we sacrifice ourselves and we get tortured, and Morocco have done like huge crimes against Sahrawis and nobody hear our voices. It's very hard even to the Sahrawis here to express their suffering. It's very hard for them. So when you find someone here, you give you the chance, and give you the opportunity to express yourself, this help you mentally and help you to do more for your country, to fight, there is so many problems that's going on, and many there is a tragedy, and it's a high brutality when you find Sahrawis who spend 10 years, 20 years, 25 years in prisons. Nobody know about them, nobody take their stories, nobody hear their tragedy when they were in the prisons, what they faced. They still kept these things inside themselves. They still have this pressure inside. But if you find a way to express yourself, this will help you. Will help you. Just to relax. I just explain it in this way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nessa.
There is the oppression and depression, and there is media blockade, and Morocco put more restriction on Sahrawis, prevent them from anything. We have no voice, no space, no rights. The Sahrawi is nothing in Western Sahara. The Sahrawi is nothing. We represent nothing in our country under the control of Morocco. So our dignity is in the floor. If we say anything, if we just mention the name of Western Sahara, we will face the prison. If we'll ask for our future, now our rights, our basic needs of life, our dreams for us, if we don't have these adventures in our community, which is like the coexistence between families, then our situation will be more worse. We are not independent. You don't have any future. You just suffer in silence. So it's very hard.
Thank you, Nessa. And let's push for a MINURSO mandate, which can also contain a human rights monitoring mechanism in our efforts and way forward. I think now it's 2035 and we're supposed to end at 2030, but I would allow myself to take a few more minutes. Please hang on, because there's one last question from Anne, who's asking, has IMS, the International Media Service, yes, or the International PEN, which is the International Union for Journalists, I think, yes, kind of. Have they made any comments about the suppression of free press and freedom of speech in the occupied territory? Brief answer before we run off.
Neither of those organizations, as I am aware of, have made statements about the suppression of free press and freedom of speech in the occupied territory. They should, and we hope that they will, and we will continue to pressure for it. But I think also that it's linked to the fact that the reporting from the occupied territories is ruined by the fact that it's so difficult to get the truth out. But I hope that with reports like the one that we just published can help to spread the truth and how the situation actually is. And by doing so, I hope that we also can convince bigger international human rights organizations to issue statements. Maybe NASA have thoughts.
Just the same as Tuna said, none of these organizations have mentioned any words about our situation in the occupied territory, but we hope that they will one day. And of course, as I said before, it wasn't easy to convince these organizations to talk about Western Sahara. Yeah, but it's we just have to put hand by hand to bring all these organizations, international organizations, in this, and to report about the situation. And actually, I would like to thank Tuna for the great report that we made together about the situation of journalists. And actually, this kind of work help a lot. And I would like also to thank her so much for her assistance and her great work that she's doing with the Sahrawi political prisoners. And I have experienced with her together the consequences of the great work she do. Thanks a lot to her, and we need more activists like you, Matilda, Milla, and others, like work together with journalists here and highlight the situation and what's going on in the occupied territory.
Thank you, Nessa, and thank you, Tony. I think just before we end off, I think like for all those of you who speak Danish, Global Action is launching or publishing a podcast series about Western Sahara of 6 episodes around Christmas. So please stay tuned and take a listen in. It's going to be really interesting, I promise. And also Global Action and the Campaign for Free Western Sahara together with or are arranging a solidarity protest on Saturday in front of the American Embassy in Copenhagen. And we've got like a range of political organizations and other Palestinian movements in Denmark to support it. It's at 3 o'clock, right, Mille? 3 o'clock on Saturday, an hour or two. Come and join if you can, and then we'll take it from here. Yep, and of course read the report that Tuna and Nessa have made. And follow our work and follow the work of Wikimedia. And I think that was it from me, at least. I would just want to say thank you so much to Tuna and Nessa for joining us tonight. It's been such a pleasure having you on board, and thank you for all your great work. It's amazing. Keep up the good spirit, and let's stay in touch.
We will. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining.